Hey Gardener, Taylor here from the Community Garden Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to provide you with some housekeeping items before we get started. If you're new to the podcast, every week, every 2 weeks, the beginning of the podcast gets updated. So the information that I'm delivering to you right now is relevant and will be removed when it's no longer relevant. So if you've already heard this, if you're binge watching or binge listening, fast forward to about 5 or 6 minutes and we'll launch into the actual episode. So for today, it is currently the week of October 20th. And for folks in the Northern Hemisphere or for folks who are in similar zones, I'm in zone 6B and my first frost date is supposed to be early October. It's now October 20th and we still haven't actually had a frost, but the plants are starting to be damaged from the cold. We're getting about -3 degrees Celsius overnight right now, at least tonight. So we're pretty much done in the garden now. If you haven't had a chance, go into your garden and just remove. Actually, you could technically leave your entire garden, but if you're planning to remove anything from your garden, go ahead and snip the plants at the base. Don't actually pull them up out of the soil as long as they weren't diseased. You can go ahead and let them break down into the soil, and it also helps with better water access for next year, getting water down into the soil, and will help a little bit with soil erosion. If your plants were diseased, pull them out fully. You can also leave all your plants over winter. You do not need to take them out of your garden. Don't let anyone make you think so. So now that we're done with the season, there's likely nothing else coming out of your garden. I still have a few loofahs, some flowers still going, a couple of small things, but for the most part, the season is over, folks. So my suggestion to you over the next couple of weeks, this will probably be the last time I update this until realistically November, December. I would really love for you to make note about your gardening season. Please, please, please journal. Write down the things that you learned this year. Write down the things that you want to do differently next year. Write your observations down. Write your questions down. Write all your ideas down. Spring you will thank winter you, okay? Please. Also, as you're out in your garden mourning its loss, if you see any seeds that have matured, you can go ahead and pop them off your plants. Marigolds are a really fun way to save seeds. You'll wait for the seed heads to, become dry and crunchy, and they usually turn black. You can go ahead and pop them off. You can store them in a paper bag. There's lots of fun plants to pull seeds off of. Snapdragons, the little heads turn brown, and then they have little holes in the top, and you can flip it over and shake the seeds into your hand. Another fun one is coriander or cilantro. It's very obvious when the seeds are ready, so take a peek at the plants that are still in your garden, see if you can pull any seeds off them. Also, this is for anyone listening to this podcast. If you've ever thought about organizing a community garden, requesting a community garden in whatever area you live in, now is the time to start thinking about that if you have any sort of winter break. So right now, we're not going to be gardening now until March, April. So we do all of our prep work during the winter months. So this is when we take new garden requests. This is when we assess new sites. We discuss partnerships with different organizations. So if this is something that you have been personally wanting to do or your organization has been wanting to do, now is the time to start prepping. Okay, let's talk about some local activities. So these are folks who are in Southern Ontario, you live in Brantford, Brant County, Hamilton, Haldimand, Norfolk, and you want to get involved with our organization. We have a couple of things coming up that I want to put on your radar. So we are participating in the Brantford Santa Claus Parade. November 30th, we are having another parade float. Last year, we had a really fun 50-foot parade float. One of our volunteers, Ken, built a massive greenhouse on the float. I made a bunch of vegetable costumes. They were like sandwich board costumes. It was so much fun. The float definitely was DIY, but it was so cute, and we really had a blast doing it together. So we're going to be doing it again this year. If you want to participate, our parade committee is going to be meeting on October 20th in the evening virtually, and you can get that link from me by emailing grow@egcgbrant.ca, or you can take a peek at our show notes page for the podcast and click the Contact Us button, and that would be the communitygardenpodcast.ca. So Santa Claus Parade, come join us. You get to dictate how much time you can give. You do not need to have any experience. Next thing, so this is very exciting. A couple of years ago, we hosted an Earth Day Community Garden Building Festival. Nope, Earth Day Community Building Festival, and we're going to be kind of re-envisioning that festival as a garden festival this year located at the Greenhouse and Learning Center. It'll be the grand opening. So that'll be happening in June of 2025. It's now all hands on deck to get this festival planned. So if you want to volunteer with us on the committee on the day of, whatever the case is, email grow@egcgbrant.ca or go to the show notes page. We're also looking for organizations who want to participate in an educational way or, have some sort of offering day of. So if you work in the horticulture, green space, environmental, gardening world, and you have something educational to offer or something of value to offer during the festival and you want to promote the organization or you want to participate, reach out, please. If you have ever thought about joining the board of directors for Eagle Ground Community Gardens, we will be having our annual general meeting in January. This is just something for you to start thinking about now. We're always recruiting for director positions as well as for committee lead positions. So I will update this when we have the final date, but our AGM's in January, and just start thinking maybe you want to get involved on the back end. We also are hosting a tree planting event at the new greenhouse site on November 2nd at 10 a.m. So you can come. Please ensure you are wearing closed-toed shoes, although it's a little too cold to be wearing sandals anyways, and consider bringing a shovel and some drinking water. We're going to be planting a permaculture orchard. This will give you a good opportunity to see the greenhouse, to see the park before maybe other folks have been able to. Also, Belonging Brant, we mentioned this in episode 8 with Armanda Lambert. Belonging Brant is hosting the ABCD Symposium for 2025 in May, and we are currently planning for the symposium. We're looking for community members to come join our committee. So if this is something that interests you, you want to learn more about ABCD, asset-based community development, shoot me a message. And finally, for my organizations that are listening, I have a couple of recommendations for you. If you haven't gotten to it yet, episode 9 with Roger Doran is about seed money. It's a fundraising platform for community gardens. It is a global platform. Please check out that episode and register for a seed money campaign. Your registration has to be in by November 12th, and then the campaign for anyone listening runs from November 15th to December 15th. And look into all the campaigns that are running and please consider donating. There is an Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure Grant due October 31st. If you've ever thought about building a greenhouse with your community garden organization, this may be a grant opportunity for you. And if you just Google Ontario Agriculture Infrastructure, it should come up. It's due by October 31st. There's also a grant right now through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. It's their Grow Grant. It's due by November 4th. And this allows various organizations to sustain their operations. It has nothing to do with gardening, but if you have been looking for an operations or a programming grant, this may be the grant for you. So I just wanted to share some of these pieces with you. I apologize, this is a little bit longer than normal. It's because I love to talk. Yeah, we're at 8 minutes. So I'm going to let you go. We're going to get into the episode now. I hope you enjoy it. As always, you can always reach out to us at podcast@egcgbrant. You can reach out to us through the show notes page at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Email me, message me, send us a message on social media. I'm always happy to answer questions and help you out. Okay, let's get started. Hey gardener, you're listening to the Community Garden Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor. In this space, we'll dig into the dirt with local gardeners of all skill levels to share tips, tricks, and stories from our gardening adventures. Let's get growing. Hey gardeners, it is time for us to dive into the interview portion of our episode. I just want to make a note, I'm still very sick, so I apologize for the audio quality. This interview, we're going to be chatting with Ruby. She is the garden champion for Spring Street Buck Park, which is a very active community garden here in Brantford. It's in the Homedale neighborhood. This was actually our first ever virtual interview, so we were still kind of working out the kinks of the platform that we were using, but I'm very impressed on, how it was able to flow. And while you're listening to the interview, if you listen closely, you may actually hear Ruby's dog in the background making a couple of noises. She was looking for some attention. So Ruby, as I mentioned, is the garden champion for Spring Street Buck Park. Ruby moved to Brantford many years ago onto a smaller property and was looking for a way to participate in community gardening and was looking specifically for a plot to rent. She ended up finding equal ground, and she was really drawn to our model and loved the idea of sharing food and sharing growing space. Ruby's been volunteering with us now for 3 years, and this is her second year as garden champion. She's doing a fabulous job. We really dive into what that role looks like and how her experience has been as the champion. Ruby is a single mom who finds really creative ways to avoid food waste and preserve food, which we talk about. And she's also very passionate with community work. So we do kind of dive in to her background on some of the other stuff that she does here in Brantford. We also really focus on the high cost of living and, how you can combat that through growing food and through volunteering and through working with other organizations. Ruby draws on her experience as a single mom and what it takes to feed kids and how she can offset that with the community garden. During this interview, we also chat about giving back to the community and some other amazing organizations that are doing really great work in the Brantford area. We talk about the value of community connections and connecting with your neighbors and what that can look like within a community garden setting. And we also chat a little bit about Ruby's work in the community, including an event that she very recently hosted that was geared towards moms, and also her work volunteering with Branching Out Brantford. We chat about engaging and managing volunteers for a very active site. As I've mentioned, this garden, Spring Street Buck Park, is very, very active. And there's a lot of volunteers that we're regularly working with. We also chat about overcoming frost damage on seedlings. We had a really big issue last year, and all of our gardens were able to push through that problem. So you have to stay tuned to hear what happened. We also chat about some pests and diseases, including blossom end rot, bindweed, and also the beauty of mulch. You've heard me talk about mulch. I will continue to talk about it. So I'm ready to dive in. Let's go.
Hey.
So Ruby, you are the garden champion for Spring Street Buck Park, just kind of around the corner from where we're both situated right now, and you've been the champion there for 2 years, right?
Yes. I've been the champion there for 2 years. I've volunteered there the year before, so I've been involved for a total of 3 years now. Well, 3 summers.
Yeah. Amazing. So then do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, kind of explain, how you came into this role, a little bit of your gardening background and your experience within the community. Spring Street Buck Park is located in Homedale, but of course we reach the broader community with some of our work, right?
Absolutely. So I became involved with Equal Grounds when I moved to Brantford in 2021. I've always really enjoyed gardening. It's always been a part of my life. I grew up around, with parents and grandparents who've also enjoyed gardening, enjoyed the whole culture around food preservation and, bringing the harvest home to preserve for your family over the winter and all of that. So it's always been very much a part of my life, and I've really enjoyed it. When I moved to Brantford, I moved to a property that just didn't have a very large property or yard space to have a garden on. So I was looking around to find actually like a plot that I could rent or some sort of a community plot that I could use so that I could continue to garden and grow vegetables for my family. I didn't get too far in that search because I very quickly came across Equal Grounds, and I was instantly drawn to the concept behind Equal Grounds, where it's, they really desire to build community, to work together, to share the harvest with the community, with local food pantries, and with each other. And I was really drawn to that connection. It gives so much more than simply, borrowing or renting a garden plot to bring food home for my family. I also was able to really enjoy the human connection in that as well. So that's kind of how I got started with Equal Grounds. The first year I volunteered, and the second year the position of champion was offered to me. So I've accepted that, and I've really enjoyed it as well. And the group of volunteers that I am with, they're all fantastic. Pretty much what I do as a champion is make sure that the schedule is there, and we all work together very well to keep that garden going. And my experiences in the community as a whole, like in the broader community, Brantford and Homedale in general, um, I I'm a single mom, and because of that, I am very connected to the difficulties around raising kids and the struggles often, especially with the high cost of living that we've been dealing with for the last number of years. Um, it hits me close to home because I've lived it. I've lived it for a number of years now, and so now that my kids are a little older, I have so much gratitude for the helping hands that I've received along the way, and I don't necessarily need to be as directly involved with my children's life. I'm not running to baseball games every single night and stuff anymore. So I was really looking for ways that I could give back, that I could perhaps be that helping hand in gratitude for really the help and the support that I've received over the last number of years. So Equal Grounds is a huge part of that. I've also actually just completed an event, and hopefully I really hope it will be the first of many events that I hosted with the help of lovely volunteers and members in the community. And it was a clothing exchange. It was really focused for all women, but I wanted to really provide that helping hand to other moms, other perhaps single moms, but those who are so focused on their kids right now, and they're in this time of their life that they forget about themselves. It's very easy as a mother to forget about yourself when you're so focused on your kids. So it ended up being an incredibly special event, and I hope to continue to do that as well. Like I said, hopefully it's the first of many, with that whole idea of self-care for moms in mind. And as well, I also really, kind of back to the food thing again, I also work with a group in Brantford called Branching Out, and it is also a volunteer organization that harvests local fruit trees for owners who don't have the time or the ability to do that. It comes back to my passion for food sustainability, for making stretching your dollar. It comes back to my passion to just make sure that every dollar that comes into the home is stretched as far as possible, and the food that we see, or the food that we bring in, is utilized in the best way possible. In working with Branching Out, I'm able to take part of some of the harvest, and I'm able to make all sorts of delicious canned goods. I've got apples in the freezer right now for we love to make apple crisp here at home. And as well, part of the proceeds go back to the owner, and part of the proceeds go to the food bank as well. So it's just another way that I love being a part. It's another way I love being a part of Brantford. I love being a part of this community, and I love this stage in my life where I feel like I am able to give back, and it's really a huge part of it is because of the gratitude I feel for all of the wonderful people in my life who have supported me in the past as well.
Real quick, Branching Out Brantford is a local Brantford organization. You can follow them on Facebook, where they actually post a lot of opportunities for volunteers to get involved in. So you can follow them on Facebook, Branching Out Brantford. You can also email them at info@branchingoutbrantford.ca. And I'm also going to put more information about their organization in the show notes. If you live in the area and you want to participate in gleaning or learn more about fruit tree education, you can definitely hang out with these folks. They also get calls regularly from farmers who have excess produce, and they invite the volunteers to come down and take part in the harvest. And again, a third goes to the volunteers, a third goes to the owner, and then a third will usually go to the food bank. So amazing organization. Go give them a follow. Wow. How amazing. How incredible. I saw some images that came out from the clothing swap, and it was really nice. Obviously kind of seeing you on the back end on social media planning this event and the support that you received, and then also to actually see some familiar faces from the group of volunteers that came down to help you kind of was a little bit full circle from somebody seeing everything from the outside and just knowing like these are things happening in our community supported by our community members. So it was really kind of nice to see that full circle. I really look forward to seeing that event happen again. I think like it was an absolutely incredible venture and really lovely intention behind it too. It's very evident that you're very passionate about your community, and I think you are in the perfect role when it comes to Garden Champion. Spring Street Buck Park is actually probably one of our most popular garden sites. Equal Ground supports 32 community gardens between Brantford and Brant County, and I would argue that Spring Street Buck Park is our most popular. There's a very large team of volunteers. There's definitely enough work to go around too, and it's a lot of people actually to manage. And I'm just curious, as the garden champion for that site, what are some of the actions that you take to help manage those volunteers and to help engage everybody and actually keep the garden growing? Just for some context, Spring Street Buck Park has 5 garden beds. They are 8x4. And it's a lot of growing space. And you know, I've also been volunteering there now for 3 years alongside Ruby. And it's grown really well every single year. And I'm just curious kind of what happens behind the scenes and how is that work executed?
So we have a Facebook page actually that all of the volunteers or sorry, I should say a Facebook group that all of the volunteers are members of. I find that this is helpful, but as has been brought up in past conversation, it is something that can be difficult for members who aren't as active on Facebook. So I also reach out through Facebook messages, and I find that the combination of both, even just a message to remind them to have a look at the page or the group, emails as needed, but I haven't found that has been needed. The group of volunteers are pretty on top of responding to messages through Facebook as needed. And we love to, I like to try to make the group as active as possible, understanding that everyone has busy lives, but during the summer, because the more active the group is, the Facebook algorithms will kind of bring it to the top for all of the members as well. So we share fun, hey, I went to the garden, I noticed this, or pictures and what have you as well throughout the season to just try to keep that activity level up as well. And it's really that combination has worked well for me so far. I think our volunteers, we continue to have new volunteers join us and some other members who move on to other pursuits, year after year. But our base group of volunteers has been a committed group for a few years now, longer than I have been here. So I think also having that stability of those volunteers who've been around for a while is helpful in maintaining the connection with the garden.
Yeah, once you start to be able to put names to faces and recognize your fellow volunteers, because not everyone's at the garden at the same time. A lot of people come and go. There is a schedule that kind of divides up the work and the watering schedule, and then we do the occasional meetup. But once you start to actually recognize faces and names, it becomes a little bit more intimate, which is really nice. We also live in a very active community as well. Again, we're in the Homedale neighborhood in Brantford, and there's always something going on down here, and it's a very neighborly community. A lot of people know each other. There's a lot of initiatives and events down here. We have an active neighborhood association, so I think that also lends to the activities within the gardens too. So, and then of course, in addition to the set volunteers that we have, there's also lots of people that tend to the gardens on a casual basis that we've never met. People obviously move through the gardens often, and they'll go in, they'll water, weed, or harvest. I was there the other day when I was doing audio testing with our podcast equipment, and I had some downtime, so I just went and pulled some weeds. So there's always stuff going on, and there's different events in that park too, and people are always asking questions. So in addition to that team of volunteers, there's also people casually moving through, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a huge part of the garden's success. And that's why the garden is there. It's for our neighbors to love and enjoy, for the community to love and enjoy. So I love to see that. Um, I love to see that our neighbors and the broader community here in Homedale feel free to come and just do what they would like to do in the garden, whether it's watering or weeding or just saying hi to the plants. That's why it's there. It it just goes to show that a garden serves a greater purpose than simply growing plants to feed you. It feeds the soul. That sounds a
Absolutely.
little bit too poetic, but it's very true. I find
Yes,
it.
absolutely. So then, we talked about community engagement and our volunteers. How has your experience been actually physically gardening in this space? What have you had success growing? What are you maybe struggling with?
That's a very good question. So our best crop probably every year is the tomatoes, though it's also a challenge every single year because tomatoes have this tendency very quickly to get, I believe it's called stem rot.
Oh, the
I should
blossom,
have
the
looked that up.
blossom end rot.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, blossom end rot. It can come quickly. Some people say tomatoes are very easy to grow, and others, I must be one of them, and maybe it's my maybe it's my influence on this garden in general. But they can very quickly grow blossom rot. But it's also our probably our uh, it's the one fruit or the one plant that we're going to continue to grow year after year. Everyone loves tomatoes. Those the grape, the cherry tomatoes that we grow are always used up very quickly, and it's always loved. So that's probably the one that I would call our favorite in the garden. The other crop that we love to grow is it's the radishes and lettuces because I find when spring comes, you're so excited to get out and in the garden, and then you have to wait for it feels like ever for some of the other crops to finally uh, get ready to the point of harvest. Where our radishes actually, I just got a note from a volunteer who visited the garden yesterday. Our radishes are ready to go now, and the lettuce is probably not far behind it if it's not there already. So I love having that and having it available. And also it can kind of you can kind of tuck it away in and around. It doesn't really take up a lot of space if you plan the garden right as well.
Yeah, and the radishes have a 28-day turnover, 25 to 28, depending
Yeah.
on the variety. So it's very easy to kind of get them in there, and then a couple weeks later, they're ready to
Yeah.
harvest. I know it can be a little bit frustrating almost to have to wait sometimes for produce when you've put in so much work into this garden and you have to wait months and months, right? So there's a lot of patience required when it comes to gardening, but when you can grow things like radishes and greens and stuff that is going to turn over faster, it's a little bit more satisfying, right? Blossom,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, blossom end rot is a condition where the ends of your tomatoes will actually turn black and rot out. So it's kind of self explanatory. It's very common in determinate tomato varieties. It doesn't happen as often with indeterminate. Super quick note on indeterminate versus determinate, and this applies to any plant. Typically, every plant is sorted into one of these categories, and the bare bones of it is determinate has a shorter growing season with a limited crop versus indeterminate, which has a longer growing season or a crop that continues to produce. A good example are tomatoes. Roma tomatoes or sauce tomatoes are determinate. They have a smaller growing season and they don't get nearly as big. You actually don't have to even trellis them. Versus an indeterminate is usually like a cherry tomato or a slicer tomato. These plants can get massive and they can keep growing all season. Another example are bush beans versus pole beans. They may yield the exact same fruit, but how they grow is very different. A bush bean is determinate. It's only going to put on a finite amount of beans. It's not going to get very big, and once the beans have been produced, that plant's done. A pole bean is indeterminate usually, and it'll just keep on growing, and it'll keep on producing fruit until it runs out of nutrients, or in our case, until the frost comes. So, quick little lesson there. The biggest reason for this is nutrient deficiencies that result from inconsistent watering. So the best way to combat blossom end rot is to ensure that the tomatoes are being watered consistently. This doesn't mean they need to be watered twice a day. It just means that whatever schedule they're on is consistent enough for them to know when to expect water. I do like stressing my tomatoes out for their first month or so to force them to put out stronger root systems and source for that water, so I don't have to water them as often. When it's not, I mean, right now we're in a heat wave, so yes, water your tomatoes. But when we're not in a heat wave, I try to maybe do every 2 days. A lot of people will say crush up your eggshells and put them in the soil, and unfortunately, this is incorrect information. Eggshells are not bioavailable. It can probably take a year for those eggshells to fully break down. If you need to amend your soil, make sure you're using some sort of compost or fertilizer that is readily available, and it's not just food scraps that are thrown into the garden that can break down right away. So just a little myth about blossom end rot and about tomatoes: crushed up eggshells, calcium, that's not necessarily going to work. The issue is that the tomatoes aren't being properly watered, and then they can't pull up nutrients. So Ruby, maybe that's a no. If that's something we experience again today, maybe we need to, or not today, this year, then maybe we can change up the watering schedule a little bit. Although we're pretty consistent out there. When was the last time we had blossom end rot?
Um, I find that it tends to come near the end of the season, like when they're first starting to become available. So I wonder if it may be that, again, and this is, everyone has a busy life. This is no salt on anyone, but everyone's lives become so busy that people start to forget to water, and so we start off with a very consistent schedule, and we do tend to in the month of July, we keep an eye on the weather and on heat waves and all of that, but we do tend to drop off a little bit purposely, so that the tomatoes and the rest of the garden can grow their roots to a deeper level. But perhaps it's just in that pattern. Maybe we need to instantly plan to only water every couple of days rather than um, watering daily and then dropping down.
That's a
So
very good
I
point.
actually I appreciate that feedback because I'm going to think on that and maybe talk to the volunteers about it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Also, another option is, for those listening, we don't use synthetic fertilizers. Actually, we don't use any fertilizers in the gardens, no pesticides, anything like that. Most of the gardens are located in city or county parks, so they're fully publicly accessible by anyone. So we really want to avoid using anything that could be harmful to any person of the public, children, things like that. So we typically top up our gardens with a really thick layer of compost, and that usually gets us through the season. But if things aren't being watered consistently and we're still noticing blossom end rot, then maybe we do need to consider fertilizing partially through the season. Last year, your first season as champion and my first season as the greenhouse and learning center coordinator. Okay, picture this. It's May of 2023. It's May 18th. For those listening, the May long weekend here in Canada and in Brantford, Eagle Ground receives thousands and thousands and thousands of seedlings that get distributed into over 100 gardens. So we got them like May 16th last year, and then May 18th we had a frost come through that absolutely killed everything. It broke my heart. Me and the president of the organization were out in the garden in the middle of the night trying to keep everything wet, and it was very nightmarish, and it's very a very different scenario than what we're currently in now, which is really beautiful gardens in June of 2024. So last year, Ruby, you received mostly dead plants, and I'm curious to hear about your experience receiving those dead plants and how they actually ended up growing. Like what was the outcome of the garden last year, when considering the fact that most of the plants were like dead when you got them.
They were in very poor shape, and I believe there were only maybe one or two that we couldn't save. They did eventually come around, and they grew well. It was disheartening, but it is the story of Canada, the story of Southern Ontario. This just happens sometimes. Um, so I mean, certainly, uh, Mother Nature had a heyday with us, but no one here was to blame, and we simply had to pick up and do the best we could with what we were given. We did end up planting a lot of, like, direct sowing a lot of seeds. We didn't bring a lot of plants back to the garden with us, if I can recall. But of the ones that we did bring back, there were only a couple that we couldn't save. And we ended up having quite a successful garden.
Yeah, so thousands and thousands of seedlings looked dead, but like you said, we kind of had to move forward anyways with the situation, the scenario we were dealing with. It was kind of the cards that we got, and we still continued to pack our orders, and everyone still took all of these what looked like dead plants back to their gardens and planted them. And what happened was most of the plants treated those main dead stems as dead stems, and they put off shoots, almost as if you were to top a plant. Most of them put on new shoots, and it definitely took a while for the gardens to get moving, because of course these plants were essentially starting from ground zero again. But most of the gardens grew okay. Most of the tomatoes ended up being big bushes because they weren't growing straight up, they were growing out. That was probably the biggest difference. But our peppers also really got whacked. Nobody had a really good pepper year last year. But yeah, Spring Street Buck Park was part of that situation, and so I'll never forget last year. That felt like a true nightmare. This year, it's now June 17th of 2024, and this year we didn't have a frost. The plants look gorgeous, the gardens look gorgeous, and then on May 30th we got a frost warning, and I thought, oh no, it was in June. It was maybe like June 4th. We got a frost warning, and I thought, screw it. Whatever happens. Like, I'm not about to turn my life upside down. The plants will survive, because we really just experienced the worst of the worst last year. So
There is something to be said for living through a nightmare, and I imagine for you, especially because it was your first year as the coordinator, like the first experience in delivering these plants, it would have been especially awful. And when I remember the frost warning this year, and I essentially called their bluff as well. I called Mother Nature's bluff. I didn't worry a whole lot, because yeah, that was my thoughts as well. As what's going to happen is going to happen. And honestly, it's like the end of May. Is this really a thing? Like, it's not going to
yeah,
happen.
I was like, this is ridiculous. My partner's grandmother, she grew up gardening, massive garden. She's in Burford, which is about 15 minutes westish of Brantford. And she always said that growing up, they waited to plant until the first full moon of June, which usually happened the first or second week. And when we got this frost warning this year, I thought, that's why they did that. But of course, the climate is changing. We're experiencing shorter and shorter winters, which means longer growing seasons. So I'm willing to risk it. I think this year, honestly, I put most of my plants in the garden like early May, and I figured if there's going to be a frost warning, I'll deal with that when it comes. I don't think we got frost at all in May until we got that frost warning at the end of the month. So, and usually, like, our quote last frost date is May 5th in this area. We're in zone 6B, so our last frost date is May 5th.
Hi, it's me. I made a little mistake when I said early October is our last frost date. It's our first frost date. So here in Southern Ontario, specifically in Brantford, we're in zone 6B. Our first frost date is early October, and our last frost date is late May. No, early May. Early May. Our last frost date is early May. Okay, bye.
Yeah, I usually just risk it, and I'm glad I didn't take any extreme measures to try and protect things. For those of you who may have community gardens, not even gardens at home, and you have a frost warning and you have tender, sensitive plants that might not make it through the frost, if you can find a way to cover your plants, whether that be a bucket over top, some sort of sheet, or you can also get what's called frost cloth. Typically, it provides just enough warmth and also a surface for the frost to lay on instead of laying on your plants. So just go out, cover your tender plants with a bucket. If you're going to use anything like tarps, just be careful, because if the plant, if its foliage is touching the tarp and a frost settles on the tarp, it can damage the foliage. But if you just try to find a way to cover everything, you should be okay. If you need to take extreme measures, and if what happens what happened last year when the frost came through and killed all the plants, if that happens again, this is what we will do. We will be setting up large fans in the area to keep air circulating. And that's actually what's used in the vineyards in Niagara region here in southern Ontario. They set up really big fans, and it helps keep the frost off of the plants. So if you have a really big situation, you could consider just setting up some fans overnight to help keep the air circulating, and you should be good. So then, Ruby, what are some other, hurdles that you experience in the garden? I know in the past we've talked about you guys are really struggling with bindweed, which we can talk about. And then also, because we're in a community garden, sometimes city staff may run over plants occasionally. I'm just curious, what other hurdles you face sometimes in the garden.
Yeah, well, I've heard about the Great Pumpkin Fiasco. That was a few years or a year before I joined the garden. But someone, the garden team at the time chose to plant some pumpkins, and pumpkins will very happily and lovingly take over the entire space. And I've heard that what happened in that situation was obviously our fantastic city workers need to mow the grass all around, and they don't have time to worry about the pumpkins. So unfortunately, the poor pumpkin plants were demolished. We've learned from that experience. Well, again, this was before my time, but it comes up. It comes up frequently, and pumpkins are now on our don't plant list.
Speaking of, didn't a rogue pumpkin show up in the garden?
And this is another, and this, you know what, this is fantastic because I love that that people feel the freedom to plant and to play and to be in our garden. That's why it's there. And this year, one of the volunteers reached out to me, and I confirmed it because I went down and checked. And we had a beautiful little baby pumpkin plant that was planted in our garden, as well as a watermelon. And earlier in the season, we had some peas, which again, I love that. I love that the community feels that kind of welcome, but greatly concerned because I didn't know exactly how I was going to handle this our baby pumpkin friend in the garden. I didn't want it taking over the entire bed or the entire garden area. So I believe I found a new home. I believe either Taylor or another one of the volunteer coordinators is going to be, if she hasn't already, taking it home. So we didn't have to cull the pumpkin. I would hate to have to get rid of a plant that a volunteer has lovingly, to kill a plant that a volunteer or community member has lovingly planted, but we weren't able to find who planted it in the first place, so we weren't able to have that conversation directly. So if anyone is listening to this podcast, and if you were the community member who planted the pumpkin, first of all, thank you so much. And also, we have rehomed it just so that we don't have any more lawn mowing fiascos happening.
Yeah, and also reach out to us because we want to garden with you. Yeah. Please, please, please.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, when we're operating on city and county property, of course, we're on public property, and there are some rules that we need to follow. I was there for the pumpkin fiasco. I was very new to Equal Ground, though. I had no idea what was going on. I just showed up with my little gardening tools and offered to help, and we had put them where they were because the area had been heavily mulched, so there wasn't going to be any lawn mowing, and they were going to grow up and over our water tote. And we think it was a weed whacking situation because sometimes weeds do come up within the mulch, like up along the bed, so they will go in and whack it. And we think that's what happened. But at the end of the day, I think there was a miscommunication because we weren't allowed to put it there, and we did anyways. So to be fair, we were breaking the rules. But yeah, pumpkins, especially when you have not a lot of real estate in a space like that, pumpkins, melons, anything that are going to get really, really, really large, it's almost not worth the real estate, especially because in order to have a successful crop, you only want a few fruit per plant, and we could be growing something that is a lot more fruitful for the community, right? So pumpkin plants, I'm growing lots of pumpkins in my garden, but yeah, not quite suitable for the community garden. And then also bindweed. I know we talked a little bit about bindweed. Kind of tell me about the struggles you have in there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I have a tiny little flower bed here at home, and I've also helped other community members with their own flower gardens as well. And I never really noticed bindweed until I think it was last year. So I don't know if it's a new thing or what, but suddenly I started talking about bindweed with one of the lovely ladies whose garden I helped with, and then it showed up in my own garden, and then it became just a crazy problem in our garden at Spring Street Park. Um, it it gets in there, it gets underneath, and it's called bindweed, I think, probably because of how it clings to the plants as it grows up, and it becomes really, really difficult to find the base and pull it out by its roots, and get rid of it without damaging the plant that it's clung to. So I have a feeling that perhaps it was a part of the mulch that we received from the city, or that it was, it spread that way through the mulch, which that mulch is fantastic. It grows beautiful fruit and vegetables, but I think that it also grows beautiful bindweed. Um, yeah, and it's really difficult for us, especially with our herb garden, because the herbs are so beautiful and bulky and plenty. It's very hard to find and get to the roots of all of the bindweed. So it's a real struggle for us right now, and I'd love any suggestions you have on how to deal with it or manage it.
Yeah, so for those listening, bindweed, I'm actually not sure, what climates it grows in, but Ruby, I'm actually in the same boat as you. I had never heard about it until last year. And, I work as the Greenhouse and Learning Center coordinator. I got a lot of questions about gardening education from people, and I started getting questions and concerns from our community garden champions about the bindweed that they were struggling with. And I was like, what is this? So I did a bunch of research, and then I started seeing it everywhere. And we also really struggle with it in Earl Haig Community Garden. I don't struggle with it in my backyard, but that's because we heavily mulch, and I'll get there in a second. But bindweed, like you said, Ruby, originates in a small space that you can't see, and it'll really target the plants that grow tall. And this includes like tomatoes, things that are going to grow really tall, beans, stuff like that. And then it's really, really difficult to unwind it from the plant without damaging the plant. It also takes over very, very, very quickly, and its roots are very aggressive. So my biggest suggestion, and like, nobody wants to hear this, unfortunately, but it's literally like you got to get in there often and dig it out, and eventually you'll get rid of it. My solution for all weeds on planet Earth, and if you know me personally in real life, if you've ever heard me speak for Equal Ground events, and Ruby, you've probably heard me say this, I love mulch. I love freshly chopped wood chips, as long as they're not black walnut wood chips. In my personal garden, I heavily mulch, 4 to 6 inches of mulch, and it suppresses all weeds, and it also makes beautiful soil. Unfortunately, this isn't really applicable in all cases, and also in all community gardens. And so unfortunately, the solution at the end of the day is really just to go in and dig it out and take your time. It's, again, something we struggle with at Earl Haig. We just replaced all the beds at Earl Haig, all brand new soil, and lo and behold, 2 months later, it's back and it's growing again. So I go in when it's small, I look often, and sometimes it's easy to see small weeds and be like, oh, I'll get that tomorrow. Don't do that with the bindweed. Just go in and get it. Dig as deep as you can, because these roots will get 2 feet long. Go in, really dig as far down with those roots as you can get, and over time, again, as long as you're really getting those roots, over time you will be able to eradicate it. Unfortunately, your suspicions about it coming in the compost and the mulch are probably correct. Typically, when you're producing compost, the compost itself heats up significantly, and it will kill all seeds. It'll kill everything. That's the beauty of composting. However, I just feel like the bindweed sometimes slips through. Maybe the compost didn't get hot enough, because a lot of these gardens, suddenly one day it showed up. And again, we use this compost in all of our sites. And Ruby, we had actually replaced all of the community garden beds at Spring Street Buck Park last year, and we had put in lots of city compost. So It likely came in with the compost, and at the end of the day, I would argue that the benefits of using the compost outweigh needing to dig out the bindweed, because, like you said, the compost is beautiful. It grows beautiful, beautiful plants,
Yes.
and it's really valuable, and we get it for free, and it's from the yard waste that's produced here in town. But people do often kind of toss a lot of weeds into the yard waste bags, which isn't necessarily wrong, but maybe, if you live in Brantford and you're digging up bindweed, maybe don't toss it in the compost, just for everyone's sanity. So unfortunately,
Yeah, so
the solution is just to keep digging it out, or to heavily
keep
mulch
at
the
it.
gardens,
Yeah.
but which we could actually do with the herb garden. We could heavily mulch it. There's definitely space to do that, and it's not something that we're growing from seed, so that's maybe something to consider, but it wouldn't be sustainable for all 5 beds.
Yeah, actually, that's not a bad idea. I have half a mind at this point to take our herb garden is lovely and beautiful, and it is completely overrun right now with bindweed and also the sage and the oregano. So, I have half a mind to give it a facelift at this point anyway, just because there's so much. So perhaps that will be our next step, is just taking out all of the herbs, putting a good solid heavy layer of mulch in, and then replacing the herbs.
Hmm. That's a great idea. I'm into it. I support it. Okay, I have a few questions for you. We'll call them rapid fire questions, but we don't have to go that fast, I promise. If you're
Sure,
okay with that?
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What is the one thing you dislike about gardening?
Honestly, it's really hard for me to close a garden out at the end of the year. I, um, I mean, there's a little bit of melancholy. I'm not one of those people who loves fall, because I know that winter is coming. Winter is just, I'm not a winter fan. So I tend to procrastinate, probably, simply because it means that the next step is no garden for a good amount of time. So I would say that that's the one thing I dislike.
I feel that in my soul. Like, truly. I am getting better with really embracing all 4 seasons and finding different ways to enjoy the seasons. Again, especially as, climate change affects us, and our winter is
Yeah,
like a little bit shorter than it used to be, but really just finding ways to still enjoy it. But yeah, it's still such a
yeah,
struggle. And if you don't live in a climate that experiences winter, oh, relish it, because seasonal depression is a real true problem.
it really is. It
Yeah.
really is. And like you, I'm working to embrace it,
Hmm.
but not 100% there yet.
Yeah, and it can always be work in progress, and we're allowed to not like things. There's nothing wrong
Yeah,
with that.
yeah,
What
absolutely. Yeah.
what one goal do you have for the community garden this season?
Well, I every year, this is my second year as being a champion, and every year, well, now we kind of have a bar. We have a baseline because I wasn't the champion the year before. So my goal is to be able to bag up and donate more vegetables this year than last year, for the local food pantries. Um, that's kind of a shared goal amongst all of the volunteers. And again, it doesn't mean that the community is welcome to partake of any of it. But if we can have enough left over that we can provide one bag more this year than we did last year, that'll be a goal that I've made.
Do you remember how many bags you donated last year?
I should have looked it up before jumping on this
That's okay.
podcast. There
I'll
wasn't.
make a little insert that we
Okay,
can
yeah,
share with everyone.
yeah, there wasn't an incredible amount, but I feel, and again, I wasn't the champion the year before, but I felt like our garden did better last year. We had a lot of beans and a lot of cherry tomatoes to donate, but I did not think to look up the actual number of how many bags I dropped off.
That's okay. I also remember we had a lot of greens too. A lot of greens that went out, lettuces, kale,
Yes,
chard, stuff like
yes.
that. Yeah, I do remember that. Hey, it's me again, hopefully for the last time. Now, since recording all of the content for this episode, I had an opportunity to chat with Ruby about what the donation numbers for Spring Street Buck Park look like. So for 2023, now keep in mind this weight is mostly assumed. Ruby had weighed a little bit of each type of vegetable in her pre-packed bags to see what they would weigh, and then from there was able to assume weight. So the produce that's produced in this garden typically goes to the little pantries in town, and there's one here in Homedale specifically that receives a lot of the produce. So for 2023, we're looking at about 4,000 grams, and for 2024, we're looking at about 2,300 grams. So yeah, we're doing great. Again, we've noticed a big increase in the amount of folks in the garden and the amount of people harvesting. So we can only ever guess what we're producing. Of course, what we harvest, we can weigh, and we have tangible numbers that way, but we really don't. It's difficult to capture who's actually using the gardens and who's harvesting from it. For those listening, there's kind of two community gardens when it comes to this area. There's the community gardens where there's volunteers growing food, but then they don't want to harvest it because they're saving it for people who might need it more. And then the produce kind of sits there until we're like, okay, we got to get this into a pantry or a food bank. And then there's other gardens where you don't see a single fresh piece of produce at all throughout the season. And in both cases, it means that it's going to feed people. But it's really funny to me when I volunteer at Spring Street Buck Park, and there's just, it's always sitting there. I know right now that I could go to the garden and make a salad for myself. Like, I'm confident I could go do that, but I couldn't go do that at, say, Earl Hagg's. So it's very funny to me when I hear about how much is being donated at a Spring Street Buck Park, because it's a very small garden, but it's just so productive, right? So yeah. What is your favorite vegetable to grow personally?
My favorite vegetable to grow personally, honestly, well, I have a couple. More recently, it's been lettuce because I've kind of challenged myself and my own little family to not buy lettuce during the summer because we have a little garden up the street that has fresh lettuce all available. So that's my necessity right now. So I love having that. I love growing that. I also, and actually this year we don't have any in our garden, but I also am really partial to Brussels sprouts, but not for the way, and I'm sure I've mentioned this a million times to our volunteers, not for the way that traditionally one would use Brussels sprouts. I love to use their leaves, to dehydrate their leaves, and grind it into a green powder. I just find that their leaves are so fantastically huge that they go so far. So you can pick up like 3 of those leaves and have a dehydrator full. And that green powder is really tasteless. So I have used it in smoothies. I have used it in casseroles. I feel like I'm serving my family well with that green powder. It doesn't have to be Brussels sprouts leaves. It's just that's kind of my personal favorite because of how huge those leaves get. But kale, spinach, even lettuce, radish leaves, radish greens I use as well, and beet greens. Kind of any green in the garden that's edible, unless it's carrot tops, because those are not tasteless. Those you will very quickly, very quickly taste in anything you put in.
What a creative way to use Brussels sprouts. I think that's fabulous. I've never heard of that before, and I will be absolutely 100% doing that. That's so cool. I love it. Yeah, carrot tops are not tasteless. My dogs will fight you for carrot tops. We actually, like, I'm kind of impartial to carrots. They're not my favorite, but like, I'm not going to gag. But I'll grow them in pots, and then they never grow because my dogs eat the tops of them off the patio every year.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so they
We've
love.
struggled to grow carrots in our garden as well. Not because of dogs, but because we just can't seem to get the seeds to germinate.
Yeah, carrots, we've discussed this with our garden champions and with you as well, Ruby, and last year. Carrots are extremely hard to germinate because they cannot dry out. They have to have consistent moisture. So for those listening that really struggle with germinating your carrots, sow your seeds, wet the soil really, really well, and then place something over top of the seeds. This could be a piece of wood. This could be a bucket. anything that's going to hold that moisture in the soil a little bit better for about 10 to 12 days. Take it off on the 10 to 12 day mark, and then they should start to germinate within 12 to 15 days. And we find this is really helpful for just helping keep that soil moist. You can also purchase seed tape or make seed tape for carrots, and that also can make it a little bit easier because the paper that's used to make the seed tape will hold moisture a little bit longer. So, Ruby, maybe we can always dig out some carrot seed tape, which we do have, and try sowing that and see if we have better luck.
Oh, I think that would be a good idea. We did try to use the plank over the carrots last year.
Yeah.
But again, because we have volunteers coming to check once a day and water and things, but I'm sure it was just that there wasn't enough presence to make sure that the moisture was there at all times.
Absolutely. Okay, I have 2 more questions for you. What vegetable do you not like?
You know what? I think I would have to say eggplant. And not because I don't enjoy the taste if it's made in a meal for me, but I have never quite figured out how to properly utilize an eggplant. So that would be I would consider that to be my least favorite because I've grown them before and I've harvested them and then I've tried and I just can't, it doesn't work for me.
I absolutely feel you on that. I don't like eggplant either. It's the texture once it's cooked. It's like a little bit too mushy. I do like it in dips and things like that, but if I can feel that texture on my tongue, it's not happening. Okay, final question, and this is also related to food. You do a lot of canning and preserving. I love seeing your posts on social media about your innovative ways to utilize your produce. You also just gave us an amazing tip about Brussels sprout leaves. What is your favorite thing and process to either can, freeze, dehydrate, any type of processing?
Oh, you've asked me to pick a favorite. That's difficult.
Or what is, one that you might suggest that people give a try?
Okay. I think that the best suggestion to give a try would be tomatoes. Everyone it's probably one of the more popular ones, but it's one of the more popular ones for a reason. I make stewed tomatoes every single year, and I have made pasta sauce in the past as well. But honestly, the stewed tomatoes, all you have to do is blend them and add a little bit of thickening, and you're good to go. So that would be my biggest recommendation. It's popular, but it's popular for a reason. The other thing that probably my favorite to eat is pickled onions or pickled beans. I find pickled onions give a fantastic addition to any sort of taco dish or casserole. It's easy because you don't have to chop up an onion while you're in the kitchen. You can just pull it out of the jar and plop it into wherever you need to go, and it's got that extra tang from the pickled flavor. So I absolutely love having pickled onions on hand. I can't say that I love making them because my eyes are very sensitive and I turn into a big crybaby, but it's worth it in the end. And then pickled beans, my favorite for a number of reasons. It's something that I've learned from my grandma, so it gives me that nostalgia of being in her kitchen with her when I'm eating them and when I'm making them. And also they're just amazing. It's put in a little dill and maybe some a few red pepper flakes or something with the pickling mix, and they're so delicious.
I agree. I also love pickled onions, and I also process I do crushed tomatoes every single year, but same process.
Okay.
And those, we keep them flavorless, so they're able to be used in a variety of opportunities throughout the year, and we usually can enough to get us through an entire year. And I didn't do any last year, and it was a huge mistake. I regretted it all winter. But then, yeah, you can just pull out these flavorless, like not spiced tomatoes. And I usually will make a pasta sauce with them. And it's nice to have them always on hand. Now, every time I go to make pasta, I'm like, oh, I don't have tomatoes. How am I going to make pasta? I got to go to the store and get tomatoes. It's become like a wild thought to me. So Anyone listening, if you want to dabble in canning, tomatoes are a really, really great place to start. And same with pretty much anything pickled. Very easy, and maybe we'll do a future episode on it.
The nice thing about the pickling with the water bath is that you can feel safe doing it as well, because you've got that high vinegar content in it. With tomato, I don't mean to dive off the deep end here, but with tomatoes, there's always that worry about that acid level. So just make sure that you're following a good recipe that is verified, I guess.
Yep.
To make sure. But with pickling, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, going for very well-known titles of books is a really great way to make sure that you're kind of on track with a safe recipe. Sometimes blog posts aren't accurate. Always check like comments to make sure that the recipes that you're following are people aren't protesting them. And then also, when it comes to tomatoes, I always actually add acid, a significant amount of acid, usually lemon juice or vinegar, to kind of bump up the acidity a little bit more. And then, of course, Ruby, I'm sure you know this, and for everyone listening, when you are eating anything canned, it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're a Rebel canner or you follow FDA guidelines, when in doubt, please throw it out. It's not worth it. I worked in the food industry for a long time, and botulism is real and botulism is scary. So when in doubt, please throw it out.
Yes.
Okay, Ruby, I'm so grateful that you came to chat with us. This has been a really wonderful conversation, and I'm really looking forward to, being able to share everything that you've taught us during this conversation, and I'm really, really grateful that you took some time out of your day to sit down with me.
Thanks so much, Taylor. This was awesome. This was really neat.
Of course.
Oh, Ruby, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me. I always really love chatting with Ruby. She's incredibly insightful, always has amazing recommendations, and you can tell that she's incredibly passionate for her community. As you heard, Ruby and I both do not like eggplant. I've just never found a way to cook it that I actually enjoy. So if you have any recommendations, stick around to the end of the episode to hear about how you can get a hold of us. I would love if you could share your recipes with us. Now, at the end of every episode, I want to debunk a myth or a misconception in the garden. And I know that gardening is trial and error, and there's a million ways to grow food and a million factors that can affect your garden. But I'm hoping that this advice might help you skip some of those potentially worthless actions. So last week we talked about using eggshells in the garden as fertilizer, and this week's theme is very similar. I want to chat about banana water. Now, if you use social media and a lot of garden tips and tricks show up on your feeds, and you've probably heard this one, they'll tell you to put a banana peel in a jar with water and shake it up, leave it on your counter for a week and shake it every day, and then use that water on your plants for a potassium boost. Now, the same concept applies as the eggshells. That banana peel simply doesn't have enough time to fully break down and to decompose to produce the nutrients to be used in your garden. So unfortunately, you may just be creating a little bit of a sticky mess on your countertop. If you feel that you need a potassium boost for your plants, you can consider just adding a really good quality compost or going out and purchasing a fertilizer that's suitable for your needs. So I hope this doesn't break anyone's heart. You're definitely not going to lose anything by putting that banana water in your garden. Just may not be doing what you want it to do. Thank you again to the City of Brantford and the Brant Community Foundation for funding this podcast, and also a big thank you to our board of directors for letting me run with this project. The Community Garden podcast is administered by Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can view this episode's show notes at thecommunitygardenpodcast.ca. That also connects you directly to our main website, so if you want to read more about the work that we do, you want to read more about the programs we offer, you can do that through that link. Podcast production and editing by Matt Wilfred at Nuthatch Consulting, and you can get in touch with Matt at nuthatchconsulting@gmail.com. Our graphic design is done by Ben at All Day Breakfast. Thanks to our lovely podcast committee, Paulina, Charlene, and Kat, for all your hard work. For folks who are listening, there is a team of us on the back end that are making this podcast come to life. So, and these folks are actually volunteers. So it's been amazing working with you guys. Please consider following, subscribing, and reviewing on your podcast platform to help us reach more people. You can follow Equal Ground on Facebook at Equal Ground Community Gardens, and you can also join our Facebook support group at the same name. It's also directly connected to the Facebook page that we have, so you'll be able to find the group. You can also find us on Instagram at equal_ground, and you can learn more about our organization either at the show notes link or at www.egcgbranch.ca. If you would like to be on this podcast as a guest and to chat about your gardening experience, you can email us at podcast@egcgbranch.ca, or you can visit the show notes page. So again, all of our resources, everything that we've talked about today, you will be able to access at the communitygardenpodcast.ca. Okay, that's it from me this week. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll chat with you next week.